think we can all agree that multiculturalism has failed in the United Kingdom. I don't really like this phrase multiculturalism because in its current form it supposes and assumes that all cultures in the world are equally valid and are equally worthy of preservation. No, Western culture is the superior culture. I will say it, and I'll continue to say it. Those are the facts of the matter when you look at what the West has achieved and modern inventions, to name but a few, and all of the different empires and the technology and the advances that we made as a civilization that the rest of the world didn't. We entered slavery on this continent, specifically in Britain, due to the Industrial Revolution, which made slave labour or slavery at all a thing of the past. So we'll never be on the page that all cultures are equal. We have the best culture, it's worth fighting for, and it's worth preserving. I think many people who watch my channel will agree with these sentiments. The right is completely divided currently, and this is to be expected, and we should have anticipated this. The same thing that's happening with Restore and Reform is the same power struggle that happened about 10 years ago between UKIP and the Tories, when the Tories, David Cameron, called UKIP voters basically nutcases, loonies and fruitcakes, and alienated a core vote, the core constituency, that is socially conservative and has right-leaning tendencies. Unless we forget, Nigel Farage and Rupert Lowe both left the Tories in the 1990s after Mrs. Thatcher left office because of Maastricht Treaty. So when I get any detractors on my channel saying that Rupert Lowe is just a Tory, Nigel Farage is just a Tory, we're all Tories. That's the reality of the situation, whether you are a reformer, whether you are a Kemi lover, or whether you're Rupert Lowe and Restore Britain. We are all conservatives. Now, what Nigel Farage should have done with Reform UK is be conciliatory, building a huge coalition, a huge tent of followers, voters, acolytes, surrogates in the legacy media, new media, podcasters, influencers, and regular Joes and Janes on the streets. He had the opportunity to do this, and he thought it'd be better to placate the centrist vote and not do that. If people think I am being critical of Reform UK, and I hate Reform UK, you are mistaken. I voted Reform UK this year in the local elections. I have a Reform MP. She is a marked improvement on previous MPs in the area. All this can be true. It still doesn't mean that you need to discount or denounce voters that would have been sympathetic and willing to work with you to overthrow the socialists and the communists in government. This was Nigel Farage and Reform UK's huge, huge mistake. I am sympathetic to many Reform voters and the grassroots. I am a Reform voter. If Restore Britain is not where it needs to be to field a full truck of candidates, when the next general election is called, we're going to have to vote Reform. Those are the apples, and that's the reality of the situation. The next election might be this year. I don't think it will be. I don't think Labour's going to lose power until 2029 at the earliest. But I wanted to clarify these 2 points, because at the moment there's a lot of online discourse about Restore Britain and supposed faux pas that Rupert Lowe has made, which I'm going to get into in a moment or two. I wanted to clarify some context of where I am positioned currently. I'm Reform adjacent. I am a Restore member. I've been completely open about this since July last year, when Restore Britain became a movement. With all that ado, I appreciate your time, and if you like what I'm saying, like and subscribe. Or comment below if you think I'm talking out of my rear end. I'm going to get into these clips now because, as I say, there's political enemies of Restore Britain that seem to want to punch right, and attack Restore Britain. And I see this as futile. I will always see it as futile when the left keep so many open goals. And we should really be doing more than pointing and laughing at the Andy Burnhams and the Zach Polanskis. But we don't. We want to fight like that's in a sack, and I don't think that's good for anybody. So, I'm going to get onto these clips now.
I ask that is because in 1996, I'm sure you've read it, the Grand Mufti of Cyprus, Nazim al-Haqqani, claimed Prince Charles had secretly converted to Islam in Turkey. And we've read this before. So to me, if that were to happen, then one could speculate and say, okay, fair, maybe that's his religious belief and he's converted, and to each his own. But maybe that's why he's slightly more protective. Now, of course, that's speculation, but when you read articles like this, you wonder if the influence is coming all the way from the top.
This is a long-held rumour. I don't personally subscribe to it. It's because of the king's appeasement of Islam and his very hands-on approach with trying to create this multicultural utopia, even going as far as to have Muslims in Windsor Castle and the Great Hall in Windsor at Ramadan. I don't recall when he did that for Christians or Protestants, and it deserves to be criticised. It's valid that people suspect that he's converted to Islam. I don't think he has. But yeah, the king should be defender of the faith, not faiths. He should be protecting the Protestant religion, which is why we had the first Brexit when we broke with Rome, back in, I think it was the 1500s. He should be living by example of his forebears like Henry VIII and remembering that England and Britain broke with Europe for a reason. We do not like being told what to do by foreign princes, powers, and potentates, to quote the oath that every parliamentarian needs to take before they can use the right honourable before their name, and they become an advisor to the king in his privy council. They all forget this. But I digress.
Well, he certainly, he has Muslim worship at Windsor and things. I mean, he's certainly very keen to propagate a multicultural society, which, again, I have no problem with if people integrate. And they accept the prevailing laws and culture of the people they come and live amongst.
This is the issue with the use of the multicultural society. It negates the overarching culture of the country. There's debate at the moment to whether we should have Islamic culture in Britain or anywhere in the Western world. I would say no, 1,000% to that. And this is why multiculturalism has failed. So I don't like the phrase that he's using. I think he's referring to multi-ethnic. But of that generation, these phrases are interchangeable. Now, integration can work in small numbers, i.e. pre-Tony Blair. When the numbers are tiny, it can't work on scale. And when it's scaled up, it's a disaster. We need remigration. It needs to be reversed.
Only reason I ask that is because in 1996, I'm sure you've read it, the Grand Mufti.
So we'll leave that one there. But this is what people are going on about online. And when I say people online, mostly it's the surrogates of Reform UK in the legacy media, Daily Mail, Spiked, other interested parties, and they're all attacking this phrase, saying he's a multiculturalist, he's a boomer, he needs to go, we can't trust him. I disagree, and I'll get to why in a minute or two. But the point of the matter is, pre-1997, the numbers were so tiny. Most people, yours truly included, didn't have an issue with it. Because when the numbers are in the tens of thousands, people are forced to assimilate because there's not enough of them to not assimilate. It becomes optional when we're told by our governments that to ask people to assimilate and to integrate is racism. No, it's not. If you want Islamic call to prayer, if you want halal meat, you go to a country where that is the cultural norm. These are the concessions we've made for God knows whatever reason. But this is what they're honing in on. They're saying the clumsy use of language means you cannot trust him. I disagree. So that's the first clip, because in the same interview, he goes on to say this. Now, if he is actually saying he's not got a problem with multiculturalism, which is what he's saying here, which everyone's jumping on, then what he says in the next part doesn't make any sense. So I'm going to play the second clip now.
The Islamic population, I think, formally is around 6% of our population. It's probably a bit more than that if you take the people who are here illegally. But we cannot afford to see that go higher and higher and allow parallel courts, Sharia courts, allow cousin marriage, allow, halal slaughter, which is happening more and more here and not being labelled properly. It's basically a takeover, and I, in the end, we have to sooner or later stand up for what we are and what history has made us.
Remember what, I think it was the late Christopher Hitchens, not Peter. Peter's still with us. He said, we need to resist while we can. We need to resist while we can. The barbarians do not take over the city until it is held open by our own people, by men and women of religion of different cloths, for example. And sooner or later we'll be told it's Islamophobic to question alien and foreign cultures that, in my view, have no business taking precedence over us, the native British. And I think Rupert's on the same page here. Now, if you take the first thing he said, where he says he's a multiculturalist, that directly contradicts this. So it's people clipping things out of context or deliberately misrepresenting. You need to be aware, and you need to see everything. You need to look at the forest, and you need to be careful that you're not missing the wood for the trees. Now, Restore Britain had put out a clarification video, which I'm going to play after this one's finished.
And if we don't, then we will lose everything that we've gained over thousands of years, and arguably deservedly so.
So be clear, Farage is a Tory, Tice is a Tory. That's why they've took a lot of Boris Wave Tories into Reform UK. Everybody on the right, to be specific, is Conservative, are Tories, alright? We're just different factions. We all want the same thing. We need to be conciliatory. I will never insult Reform UK voters or commentators on my channel. I won't do this because it's unedifying and it doesn't help our purpose. So I'm going to play the clarification video now. The clarification video from Restore Britain they put out today.
A short passage from your foreword to the report, which I think is, can sort of preside over this conversation we're about to have about Manchester, which is obviously one of the hotspots where this kind of thing has been going on. You spoke about the cause of this, and I think we addressed this very well in this introduction. You say the root cause was immigration, beginning with the British Nationality Act in 1948 and escalating under Tony Blair from 1997 onwards.
I agree with this. This is the foreword from a report that's recently been released by Restore Britain. They've hit the nail on the head with the 1948 British Nationality Act, which I've cited many times on my videos, which gave Commonwealth, former Empire Dominion nations a route to citizenship in Britain and to come here and quote-unquote integrate, which is one of the major reasons why we got the grooming gangs all over Britain that are still going on today. I've always said this, and I don't necessarily with the way Rupert will frame it, but he's getting the right nub. Maybe not the right outcome, but that's conjecture. We were never asked when our citizenship was given to all and sundry. We were never asked, we never voted for it, it wasn't in any manifesto, and it was never given to us in a referendum. So is hitting the right knob here? We were never asked. Now, this second point that I will go on to in a moment or two is something I want to unpack a little bit as well regarding the integration.
Believing proud nations to be responsible for the mid-20th century destruction of Europe, our post-war leaders embraced diversity and multiculturalism as the supposedly civilized alternative. This report establishes beyond any doubt that this open society obsession has in fact enabled untold barbarism of its own. Oil and water do not mix, and cultural differences going back centuries are the genesis of this problem.
Well, I've made it very clear, and I've made it very clear on various interviews and podcasts that I've done, that multiculturalism was the way in which I think post-war Europe decided it was going to undermine the nation states and undermine the cohesion that created the high trust societies that we have developed over many thousands of years, and they don't develop overnight. So I think it's meant that it's brought in people who don't understand how we operate, and I've said in the past, Lee Kuan Yew came to London after the war, and he modelled Singapore, which, by the way, is an incredibly successful society now, on post-war England, where you had total trust. You had people with honesty boxes for newspapers in London.
This is an interesting point, and it's one that I would share. If you look at the crime rates in Singapore, they are very, very, very low. And that is why we need to have a similar zero tolerance approach in Britain to regain a high trust society that we lost. The high trust society that we had was developed over centuries because back in the day, medieval times, Victorian times, the Tudor era, we had harsh penalties for comparatively minor crimes. So because we understood the penalties were so severe, we never transgressed. This is all the way up until the modern times. My generation was brought up never to bring trouble to the door. Never to bring trouble to the door, nothing down for you if you bring the coppers to the door. That's a thing of the past now, because we've had such an influx of people, maybe over 10 million in the past 2 decades. They don't have that mindset, they don't have that value set, and not only that, they're put on a pedestal above the native population, and they're treated with kid gloves. So not only have they not had the conditioning to live in a high trust society, they're told they don't have to. They don't have to behave in a high trust way because their consequences are not going to be as severe as even the native population currently face.
And the whole thing was a nation state at peace with itself. But in order to undermine our nation state, they had to create this multicultural society. So I think multiculturalism, as Enoch Powell said in 69, is undesirable, and it has palpably failed.
Yes.
But
there we go, multiculturalism has failed. So even if you have the principle that you are a multiculturalist and you have that worldview because you're of that generation, that in theory it should work, the practice is very different. And the reason why the practice is very different is simply because you cannot assimilate that many people. No time to do so. And when you're having foreign language signs, like down in Tower Hamlets, and you have local politicians in Tower Hamlets running for office abroad, well, if they're fully assimilated and integrated into Britain, and Britain is your home, you would have no wish or desire to want to run for office in a foreign land because it's a foreign land. Something to think about.
in dealing with the issue, I think what we've always said, and it's in our mass deportations document, we've actually produced a document so people can read what our plan is to try and restore the British Constitution and Britain for the tax-paying, honourable, decent, law-abiding British people. And that starts, as we know, with detaining and deporting people arriving illegally, then finding and deporting people living here illegally, then deporting the 10,500 foreign criminals in our prisons, And then we turn our attention, in the same way that Sweden and Denmark have, to sorting out people who are living here on benefits, who've never contributed to Britain.
Yeah.
And we do it by basically dealing with the welfarism. So we reduce welfarism, we create a hostile environment, and we encourage people to go home naturally.
This is very, very, very good, and it clarifies a few things. If it restored Britain, or even a reform party got into government in 2029, all of this is low-hanging fruit. You disincentivize people from coming here. You create a hostile environment where they don't get social housing, they don't get benefits if they've not paid into the coffers. And you get rid of the foreign criminals, over 10,000 in British prisons currently. That frees up prison spaces. I don't really care what happens to them when they're not on my land. And you get rid of the 200,000 immigrants, the illegal immigrants, that are here waiting for their asylum claims to be processed. Because when they say this, the processing asylum claims, they're just getting stamped through. So this is low-hanging fruit. You disincentivize people from coming, and you hit your campaign pledges of millions are going because they're voluntarily deporting themselves. They're here for the benefits, they're here for a free ride, they're here to get all the freebies. If you stop the gravy train, they self-deport. This is all good, and this is completely the right approach. You don't want to blunder like what happened in America with the ICE. Now, me personally, I would support a British ICE. I would. I'm that hard line on it. However, optics matter. So we're going to continue.
And at the same time, if necessary, we incentivize them to leave. But what we can't do is be unfair or illegal towards people who, through no fault of their own, have been encouraged in a thoroughly underhand, devious, and misguided way to come and settle here. And if they're contributing to our economy, as I've said in the past, and they are making a sort of valuable payment of taxes and a contribution, and they accept our laws and they integrate it into our society, there are people who don't think that is desirable, but nevertheless, they've come here in good faith, and we cannot treat them in a way which is not either legal or fair.
I would say he's sort of. I mean, I've made this point on my videos, and I've even wrote a piece on it. You can look at the place where I put the articles that I write sometimes. There should be a traffic light system. Anyone post 1997 should have a red light. Anyone post 1948, 1997 should have an amber light. And there should be an assimilation test or a reckoning to see if they've successfully integrated into Britain. For example, you've got a granddad now who's lived in Britain for 50 years, and he's from Pakistan. And he's lived in a siloed community for 50 years, and he doesn't speak a lick of English. Well, he's failed the assimilation test. They are a bad faith actor. They've not integrated by choice, they've not assimilated by choice. They should go. On the other hand, if you've got somebody who has assimilated, has integrated, and they're contributing to society, this is the nuance that people lose, and this is what we should never lose sight of.
So I think I've always been consistent in my view that I want an accountable government representing the British people in Westminster. That's what I've spent the last 30 or 40 years fighting for since I questioned the Maastricht Treaty. I want an accountable Parliament, which we haven't got. We've been undermined, we know, by Tony Blair's constitutional reforms, which has created a corrupt judiciary. It's created an unaccountable civil service, which is out of control. Far too many of them. They're paid far too much. Their pensions are far too big, and they don't do enough. So, I mean, look, we've got a lot of work to do to restore a country which basically has accountable government, which was envisaged basically under our British Constitution of 1689. And we've gone such a long way from that we've, thanks to this fear of being called racist, which is, I think, part of this post-war agenda, made people very frightened to actually call out what is clearly wrong.
Correct. Fairness is paramount. Abdul from Kabul, who's jumped on a dinghy from France over to Britain, should not be here. They should not be in a hotel, and we shouldn't be paying for them. This is common sense. Restoring the British, the English, and the Scottish constitutions to circa 1689-88 is good. This is the language that I want. This is what I want to see. This gives the clarity and the context that we need. Do I think he was clumsy with language? Yes. Is there anything that he said here I don't disagree with? No. Are there some online actors and commentators that think it doesn't go far enough? Probably. But unlike Reform UK, he won't denounce them. He won't tell them to fuck off, pardon the language, which was David Cameron's mistake 10 years ago and Nigel Farage's mistake. It's the disavowing of potential voters. Alright? So I'm going to leave this here. I hope I've clarified my position on where I stand with the Tories, Reform UK and Restore Britain. Always be mindful of what agenda people posting is aiming for. I will never denounce good-natured, well-intentioned people who, in my view, are misguided with who they're voting for, because at the end of the day, we are on the same side. I hope I'm coming across as authentic, real, and honest. I won't denounce anybody on my side of things. I wish Restore Britain well. This clarification is welcome. There's a lot of people that are having online meltdowns that don't help anyone and don't serve anybody but our political enemies. Have a good evening, and thank you for again watching. See you in the next video.